On the night of August 21st, 1986, a deep rumbling sound rolled across the waters of Lake Nyos in Cameroon. Then, a strange and total silence. In the villages cradled in the valleys below, people and animals just stopped. One moment they were living and breathing, the next, they weren't. There were no screams, no struggle, just a silent, invisible wave of death that washed over the countryside. By morning, over 1,700 people and thousands of animals lay dead, with no wounds, no signs of violence at all. When rescuers arrived, they walked onto the scene of quiet, unimaginable horror. What kind of weapon could possibly do this and leave no trace? The killer wasn't a bomb or a poison. It was the lake itself. A beautiful body of water that had just become one of the planet's most bizarre and deadly forces of nature. For the handful of people who survived, the night was a confusing nightmare. Some remembered a strange smell like gunpowder or rotten eggs right before everything went dark. Others recalled feeling a strange warmth just before passing out. When they finally woke up, some as long as 36 hours later, they were surrounded by the bodies of their families. Their neighbors, their cattle, entire villages had been silently wiped out. The scene was completely baffling to the first responders and scientists who rushed to the area. The victims had no signs of trauma. It was as if the very air had turned against them. And then there was the lake. The water, normally a brilliant blue, had turned a deep rusty red. A colossal wave, maybe 25 meters high, had slammed into the shore, flattening trees and plants all along the lake's edge. All the clues pointed to some kind of violent event inside the lake. But what could create a silent, invisible cloud of death that suffocated everything in its path? For over 20 kilometers. The world had never seen anything like it, and the race was on to figure out what kind of killer was lurking in those waters. So how does a lake just explode? To get it, you have to understand Lake Nyos. It's what's called a crater lake, which means it fills the hollow of a dormant volcano in a geologically active part of Cameroon. For centuries, it was just a beautiful, peaceful landmark for the local communities. But deep beneath its calm surface, something deadly was happening. The lake sits right above a pocket of magma, the molten rock in the Earth's mantle. This magma is constantly leaking gases, mostly carbon dioxide, up from deep inside the planet. For hundreds of years, that invisible gas was seeping up through the rock and dissolving into the cold, deep water at the bottom of the lake. Now Lake Nyos is incredibly deep, over 200 meters, and its water is stratified. Think of it like a layered cake. There's a warm, lighter layer of water on top, and a cold, dense, and much heavier layer at the bottom. The key thing is, these layers don't mix. So for all that time, the CO2 just kept building up in that bottom layer, held down by the crushing pressure of all the water above it. The lake had become a ticking time bomb, saturated with an unbelievable amount of dissolved gas, just waiting for something to set it off. The best way to picture what happened at Lake Nyos is to think about a bottle of soda. As long as the cap is on, all the CO2 that gives the drink its fizz is dissolved in the liquid, held in place by pressure. You can shake that bottle, and even though the pressure builds up, the gas stays put. But the second you twist the cap, you release the pressure, and whoosh, the CO2 violently erupts out of the liquid in a fountain of foam. Lake Nyos was basically a giant, natural version of that soda bottle. The cold, deep water was like the soda, and the hundreds of feet of water on top acted as the cap, keeping an immense amount of CO2 trapped below. Year after year, more gas seeped in, making the water more and more saturated and building the pressure higher and higher. Scientists figure the lake was holding millions of tons of carbon dioxide. It was a perfectly balanced but incredibly fragile system. All it needed was for something, anything, to metaphorically twist the cap. This type of event is called a Limnic eruption, and it's one of the strangest and rarest natural disasters on Earth. The explosion at Lake Nyos was the deadliest one ever recorded. On that night in August, something finally disturbed the lake's delicate balance. Scientists still debate the exact trigger. It might have been a landslide tumbling down the shore, a small tremor from the volcano below, or maybe even a sudden heavy downpour of cold rain. Whatever it was enough. The disturbance pushed some of that supersaturated bottom water upwards. As that deep water rose, the pressure holding the CO2 in place started to drop. This set off a catastrophic chain reaction. The rising water felt less and less pressure, which caused more and more CO2 to bubble out, just like opening the shaken soda. This eruption of gas was so violent, it shoved even more deep water toward the surface, creating a runaway explosion. In a matter of seconds, an estimated 1.2 cubic kilometers of carbon dioxide gas burst out of the lake. The blast was so powerful, it launched a fountain of water and foam nearly 100 meters into the air and created a tsunami-like wave that wiped the shoreline clean. The deadly soda bottle had just been opened. What happened next was the silent part. Carbon dioxide is about 1.5 times heavier than air. So when that gigantic cloud of gas erupted, it didn't just float away. Instead, it formed a thick, dense blanket of gas about 50 meters deep that hugged the ground. This invisible cloud sank into the surrounding valleys and started flowing downhill like a river, moving at speeds up to 100 kilometers per hour. It poured silently into the villages of Nyos, Cam, and Cha, because it was heavier than air. It pushed all the oxygen out of the way. People and animals were caught completely by surprise and were asphyxiated almost instantly. They took a breath, but instead of air, their lungs filled with carbon dioxide. They would have lost consciousness in seconds. Many died in their sleep, never even knowing something was wrong. The devastation was staggering. In the end, about 1,746 people died, along with 3,500 cattle and countless other animals. The gas cloud was so thick and potent that it killed people over 23 kilometers away from the lake. The survivors were often people who happened to be on higher ground, just above the deadly layer of gas. Some woke up to find everyone around them was gone. It is still the deadliest event of its kind in recorded history. The science behind a disaster like this is both terrifying and incredible. If you find this story as fascinating as I do and want to learn more about the hidden forces that shape our world, take a second to subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. We get into mysteries like this one every single week. In the days after the disaster, an international team of scientists arrived at Lake Nyos, desperate to figure out what had happened. They pretty quickly ruled out poison gas from a volcanic eruption because the trees and plants were mostly fine, except for where the giant wave had flattened them. The lake's new reddish color was a huge clue. It was caused by iron-rich water from the bottom that had been turned up to the surface and basically rusted in the air. By taking water samples from different depths, the teams confirmed the Limnic eruption theory. They found that the deep water was still full of CO2, and they realized the lake had already started to recharge, setting the stage for it to happen all over again. The tragedy had a devastating impact on the area. About 10,000 people had to be moved from their homes to resettlement camps, and many could never go back because of the danger. For the survivors, the psychological trauma was immense, and many suffered from lasting health issues like respiratory problems from the gas exposure. With the very real threat of another explosion, scientists and engineers had to figure out how to make the lake safe. The solution was surprisingly simple in theory, but a huge challenge in practice. They needed to let the gas out safely. The plan was to install giant pipes that would go from the surface all the way down into the CO2-filled bottom layers of the lake. The system is actually pretty brilliant. To get it started, they pump water up the pipe. But once that gas-heavy water rises to a certain level, the pressure drops enough for the CO2 to start bubbling out on its own inside the pipe. This process, like a mini-controlled eruption, is powerful enough to create a self-sustaining fountain. These pipes now create a permanent gentle release of gas, stopping it from ever building up to explosive levels again. The first pipe was installed in 2001, and 2 more were added in 2011, which has massively reduced the amount of gas in the lake. They also set up alarm systems and evacuation plans just in case. The disaster at Lake Nyos, as horrible as it was, wasn't completely unique. Just 2 years earlier, in 1984, a smaller but similar eruption happened at Lake Nyos, also in Cameroon, which killed 37 people. That event was a warning sign, but nobody fully understood the danger until after Nyos. To this day, these are the only 2 confirmed limnic eruptions in recorded history. But there is another, much larger lake that poses a similar threat. Lake Kivu, on the border of the Democratic Republic of Congo and Rwanda. Lake Kivu is almost 2,000 times bigger than Nyos and contains hundreds of times more dissolved gas, not just CO2, but also explosive methane. With more than 2 million people living around its shores, an eruption at Lake Kivu could be apocalyptic. Luckily, the danger is well known. There are now projects underway to not only vent the dangerous gases, but to actually extract the methane as an energy source, turning a deadly threat into a vital resource. The story at Lake Nyos is a powerful and humbling reminder of the hidden dangers that can lie sleeping right under our feet. It was a perfect tragic storm of geology and physics, where the slow, silent breath of the earth collected in a deep, dark pool until it burst out with horrifying force. But the exploding lake is more than just a scientific curiosity. It's proof of the incredible power of nature and of the human ingenuity that works to understand and disarm its deadliest threats. From a mysterious, silent killer, Lake Nyos has become a natural laboratory, teaching us unforgettable lessons about the complex and sometimes terrifying world just beneath the surface.